What is divine immunity worth when 100,000-strong army sits at your gates? The ancient Near East asks this question in the year 1225 BC. Babylon dictates its will to the great powers, yet this ancient city does not possess the world's most formidable regular army. Its priests pay for military alliances not with silver bullion, but with dusty clay tablets, trading profitably in ancient prophecies. It is the greatest political anomaly of the era. Sacred status serves the capital better than deep moats. But in the north, a completely new military force is rapidly taking shape. To them, that sacred status means nothing. The sun mercilessly bakes the massive brickwork of the towering ziggurats. Priests in snow-white robes solemnly perform ritual sacrifices atop the temples, absolutely certain of their divine safety. Behind thick walls, the Euphrates slowly carries its murky waters. In the cool gloom of the throne room sits King Kashtiliash IV, leaning heavily on a massive golden scepter. He listens condescendingly to the flattering reports of his governors. Foreign diplomats from across the known world submissively bring him rich gifts. Merchant caravans daily offload precious blue lapis lazuli and fragrant cedar. Babylon arrogantly rests on the laurels of its past glory. The local nobility greedily divides the fabulous profits from vast temple lands. These pampered men have long forgotten the harsh ring of steel. They stubbornly ignore every alarming intelligence report from the northern borders. Messengers bring terrifying news of foreign regulars on the move. Kashtiliash IV lazily brushes off the reports from his own military intelligence, openly dismissing his ambitious northern neighbors as uncouth barbarians. Pride blinds the Babylonian elite like a thick, impenetrable fog. They firmly believe in the absolute permanence of the established world order. While Babylon monotonously burns sweet incense, Ashur smelts copper without pause. The hot air shimmers over massive furnaces as the space hums with the rhythmic, heavy thud of blacksmith hammers. The Assyrian king, Tukulti-Ninurta I, strides quickly onto the dusty parade ground to personally and meticulously inspect endless rows of new war chariots. This man is a dangerous and ruthless strategist, methodically building a military machine of unprecedented power. The forges work through the night, fire illuminating the sweaty, grimy faces of the craftsmen. The Assyrians are mass-casting heavy bronze spearheads and reinforcing wooden shields with thick oxhide. Tukulti-Ninurta I is cold-bloodedly breaking the ancient rules of the game. He has no need for mythical spiritual authority. He needs fertile farmland and physical resources. He needs total control over the vital river trade routes. Assyrian army logistics operate without the slightest hitch. Quartermasters keep strict written tallies of every measure of fodder, while scribes dryly record the number of service horses in long clay registries. This is no spontaneous raid by hungry nomads. This is cold, mathematically calculated preparation for total war. Enemy spies easily cross the border, disguised as ordinary date merchants, methodically pacing out the height of Babylonian walls and counting the relaxed guards at the main copper gates. All collected data quickly lands on the Assyrian king's wide table. He spends hours meticulously studying detailed blueprints, looking for the slightest vulnerabilities in the enemy's seemingly perfect perimeter defense. An aggressive diplomatic duel begins at the borders. Envoys meet on parched, heat-cracked, disputed lands, spitting calculated insults through gritted teeth. The Babylonian emissaries speak with studied deliberation, looking down on the northern officers with disdain. They arrogantly display old treaties bearing the seals of long-dead kings, insistently demanding respect for the sanctity of their sacred capital. The Assyrian negotiators answer in short, clipped phrases, their calloused hands constantly gripping the hilts of their daggers. The brutal dispute is fought over every inch of border pasture. Diplomats weigh every word. The northerners harshly demand full military control over the routes. The Babylonians hesitantly offer paltry financial compromises. Tukulti-Ninurta IV finally loses his composure. He sends an ultimatum to the northern capital, the text containing a direct threat of a terrible curse from the great god Marduk. Tukulti-Ninurta I silently receives the Babylonian envoy in his command tent and takes the heavy cuneiform tablet in his hands. The Assyrian ruler's gaze remains ice-cold. He slowly opens his fingers. The tablet hits the hard stone floor with a crash, the baked clay shattering into hundreds of shards. The sharp crack of the impact echoes in the dead silence of the tent. This is the physical end of all diplomacy. This is the point of no return. By the end of 1225 BC, hiding the grim truth becomes impossible. Assyria is openly massing an army of unprecedented size right at Babylon's borders. Tens of thousands of well-armed infantrymen pitch their camps on the flat plain. Thick, acrid smoke from their numerous evening fires blankets the horizon. Babylonian sentries watch this gray haze from their high observation towers with mounting dread, the night wind blowing the sharp smell of burning into their faces. In Babylon itself, meanwhile, a mass blind self-delusion continues to reign. The high priests of Esagila hastily conduct complex nocturnal astronomical observations, desperately reading the signs of fate in the flight of birds of prey. The birds circle and fly south. The priests loudly proclaim this a sure symbol of a swift and bloodless victory. The capital's nobility breathes a collective sigh of relief, stubbornly continuing to throw lavish night feasts in the shaded hanging gardens. Sweet pomegranate wine flows like a river. None of the military commanders want to personally check the sharpness of the bronze swords in the city arsenals. The leather straps on the heavy shields have long since rotted from time and the merciless heat. The ceremonial war chariots sit covered in a thick layer of gray dust in dark sheds. Fat guards in the city markets habitually collect copper taxes from frightened visiting merchants. These soldiers simply have no real combat experience. In the vast throne room of Tukulti-Ninurta IV, a ringing, dead silence suddenly falls. Court musicians fearfully lower their instruments. The king of Babylon stares tensely at the pale faces of his parade generals. For the first time, he clearly realizes the true scale of the approaching catastrophe. He urgently orders an immediate reinforcement of the internal temple guard, yet he is paralyzed by the fear of distributing weapons from the arsenals to the common citizens. He makes his final, blind bet on his unshakable divine status, giving a nervous, rambling order to prepare the regular troops for an open sortie beyond the walls. These troops have not trained during the long years of peace. They are used to escorting slow, religious processions. They do not know how to hold a tight shield wall under a hail of armor-piercing arrows. The gold embossing on their expensive armor shines beautifully in the sun, but beneath it lies a fatal vulnerability. Meanwhile, in the north, the foreign army begins its inevitable march. The heavy wheels of thousands of war chariots bite simultaneously and deeply into the dry, cracked earth. The rhythmic, deafening tramp of tens of thousands of boots resonates in the scorching air. The copper scales of polished armor blindingly reflect the midday sun. This massive, perfectly trained army moves forward as a single, soulless monolith. In their tight ranks, no one sings hymns of praise. Only the rhythmic clatter of sharpened weapons and the sharp, barking commands of officers can be heard. Behind the iron-stepping legions, a thick, impenetrable wall of gray dust rises rapidly, hiding the horizon and swallowing the light. The air becomes unbearably stifling from the approaching clash of eras. Bronze and sand become the first physical harbingers of the imminent storm over the Euphrates. In doomed Babylon, the king watches this thick dust storm with horror. Kashtiliash IV perfectly understands the true meaning of this gray cloud. The end of the era of sweet diplomatic illusions is happening right now. Fine sand settles in an even layer on his heavy gold bracelets. While the enemy's steel ring rapidly tightens beyond the horizon, the ruler makes his most fatal decision. He gives a sharp order to open the monumental copper gates of the capital and arrogantly leads his army out into the open field. This is an act of absolute political desperation, a futile attempt to prove his divine right to rule. The sun stands at its zenith over the scorched, flat plain. The thick heat melts the mind. The Babylonian ranks take agonizingly long to form up. Their pampered commanders shout loudly and nervously, fumbling with complex combat formations. Common soldiers hesitantly grip heavy spears. The gold ornaments on the commanders' breastplates flash brightly and uselessly. The full-length wooden shields are richly decorated with sacred protective symbols. This is an exclusively showpiece army, completely unprepared for a real bloodbath. Opposite them, the Assyrians wait in total silence. Their ranks are drawn up with mathematical precision. No blinding gold, only dull copper and reliable dark bronze. Tukulti-Ninurta I coldly assesses the disposition of the lumbering enemy, instantly spotting every tactical gap. After several grueling hours of a nervous standoff under the scorching sun of 1225 BC, the action erupts. The Assyrian war chariots suddenly lunge forward, lathered horses wheezing heavily as the hard ground vibrates beneath the soldiers' feet. The Babylonian heavy infantry tenses, expecting a direct frontal assault. But the northerners use a completely different tactic. The line of chariots suddenly splits into two fast wings, rapidly bypassing the Babylonian formations from the flanks. Tukulti-Ninurta I employs advanced pincer maneuvers, leaving his center provocatively open. The Babylonians cheer, naively thinking the enemy is cowardly. Kashtiliash IV gives the signal to advance. It is a death trap. The southern heavy infantry moves forward, slowly and clumsily, quickly losing their formation. Dust instantly clogs eyes and lungs. The air is thick with the sour smell of sweat. Suddenly, a solid wall of dense Assyrian shields rises before the advancing troops. Behind them stand hundreds of experienced archers. A short, guttural command rings out. The bright sky rapidly darkens as thousands of arrows with heavy armor-piercing tips fall simultaneously onto the bunched-up Babylonian ranks. Sharp bronze easily pierces the old ceremonial armor. Men fall in droves. Screams of agonizing pain tear through the silence of the plain. Impact. Pause. Impact. The Babylonian line breaks instantly and irrevocably. A wild stampede begins. Soldiers abandon their expensive shields and turn their backs to the enemy. By the evening of this bloody day in 1225 BC, the Assyrian pincers finally snap shut. Fast chariots plow into the retreating crowd from the exposed flanks, heavy wooden wheels mercilessly crushing bone. Long spears methodically transfix unprotected backs. The Assyrian infantry begins its slow advance. Step. Short thrust. Step. Another thrust. This is a calibrated machine of total destruction. They take no prisoners on this battlefield, methodically and brutally butchering the elite of the ancient society. Sacred symbols are trampled deep into the bloody filth. The military pride of the ancient world turns into a pile of corpses. The king's personal guard desperately tries to save their paralyzed ruler, forming a tight ring around the heavy gold chariot of Tukulti-Ninurta I. A nameless Assyrian infantryman with a battered face breathes heavily, firmly gripping a spear shaft slick with blood. He clearly sees the glint of the high golden crown ahead. He makes one short, sharp lunge. His copper blade accurately hamstrings the Babylonian horse. The animal collapses onto the trampled earth with a wild, piercing neigh. The heavy chariot flips violently. The king of Great Babylon falls into the grimy road dust with a deafening crash, his precious crown flying from his head. The last guards are quickly killed. Enemy warriors circle the fallen lord. They do not finish him off. They grab him roughly by the arms. Tukulti-Ninurta I personally rides up to the site of this historic capture. Thick dust slowly settles on the corpses. The silence is broken only by the death rattles of the wounded. The Assyrian king hops easily to the ground and walks right up to the defeated enemy. The clay cuneiform chronicles dispassionately and accurately record this unprecedented moment. The text reads like a dry judicial sentence. The words of Tukulti-Ninurta I were, "With my own hands I seized Tukulti-Ninurta, king of Babylon. I stepped with my feet upon his royal neck as if upon a footstool." This is not just a literary metaphor of ancient scribes. It is a specific physical action. The dirty sole of a heavy Assyrian boot grinds the face of a living god into the blood-soaked earth. The ancient myth of divine protection is shattered. The capture of the legitimate ruler causes an unprecedented political shock. The ancient world has never seen anything like it. A living god is roughly shackled in heavy copper chains and dragged behind the victor's war chariot like a common slave. Terrifying rumors of the ruler's fate instantly spread throughout Mesopotamia. Messengers on lathered horses carry the news in a panic to neighboring powers. Babylon's regular army is completely destroyed. There is no one left to defend the capital beyond its walls. Hundreds of abandoned ceremonial shields rot under the scorching sun. The victors methodically collect salvaged copper weapons and cold-bloodedly finish off the severely wounded. No compassion, only dry military pragmatism. The remnants of the broken, demoralized army flee back toward the safety of the monumental walls, bringing a tangible fear into their city. The Assyrian army doesn't even take a break to celebrate. Commanders busily reorganize the long marching columns. Tukulti-Ninurta I gives a new, short order. The massive, well-bloodied military machine slowly turns south. The path to the greatest city in the world is now wide open. The soldiers begin their measured march. Ahead of them lie colossal city fortifications. Behind them remains only a vast field of the dead. The earth thrums hollowly under the heavy feet of the victors. The ruthless arena of new military logistics begins. The ruthless arena of new military logistics begins right before the ancient gates. The Assyrian army marches along the dusty roads without a single stop. They meet no resistance. Small settlements have long been abandoned, the peasants having fled behind the high fortress walls of the capital. Wheat fields are mercilessly trampled by thousands of boots. Behind the combat units, Hundreds of heavy wagons stretch incessantly, wooden axles creaking under the colossal weight of military cargo. The wagons carry dry provisions and fresh water in sealed clay jars. Engineering corps bring up the rear of these long columns. These are the elite of Tukulti-Ninurta I's army, dry, disciplined masters of siegecraft. They carry the components of massive war machines, completely disassembled for high marching speed. Thick cedar logs lie in even stacks. Heavy forged chains are neatly coiled. In the wagons lie heavy coils of strong rope and thousands of bronze brackets ready for immediate use. The entire logistics system works flawlessly. Engineers fix broken wheels in minutes, right on the move. Quartermasters strictly record every measure of grain issued. No chaos, no improvisation on the march. Only the dry, mathematically calibrated calculation of the commanders. By the end of the first month of autumn, 1225 BC, the vanguard reaches the great city fortifications. Babylon appears before the northerners in all its monumental grandeur. Millions of thick, fired bricks, high crenellated towers, and wide defensive moats. The ancient temple architecture is designed to inspire deep awe in foreigners, but the northern soldiers feel none. They see only another complex technical problem. Commanders hop cold-bloodedly from their war chariots, pulling out long, marked ropes to pedantically calculate the safe range from the defenders' arrows. The invaders' military camp is built with frightening methodicalness. Soldiers quickly set up even geometric rows of tents, forming clear, straight lines of wide streets. Armed patrols regularly relieve each other at the precise signal of water clocks. Commanders strictly forbid lighting fires in the forward outposts, maintaining a strict nocturnal silence. Soon, the heavy thud of hundreds of axes simultaneously cuts through the peace. The engineers begin the large-scale assembly of siege mechanisms. The dull, rhythmic thud of hammers reflects repeatedly off the high walls, a constant, monotonous sound that grinds at the psyche of the besieged. It does not stop for a single second. Hard wood snaps with a loud crack under the blows of iron wedges. A nameless Babylonian sentry on the eastern tower firmly grips the slick shaft of his copper spear. Cold sweat pours down his grimy face as he looks through a narrow rectangular embrasure. He clearly sees the even squares of multi-story wooden towers and hears the piercing screech of iron saws relentlessly biting into cedar. The acrid smell of raw oxhide hits his nose. His fingers tremble treacherously on his heated weapon. For the first time, he fully realizes his physical vulnerability. These colossal brick fortifications will not save him. They will only briefly delay the end. Below, carpenters lash huge beams together to form heavy battering rams. Mighty cedar trunks are securely suspended on metal chains, fixed inside stable wooden frames. Massive bronze heads are tightly fitted onto the working ends of the logs. The tower frames are carefully clad in several layers of thick animal hides, which soldiers constantly douse with fresh water and liquid clay. This is reliable protection against the enemy's incendiary projectiles. Assembly goes on around the clock, oil torches brightly illuminating the work sites at night. Inside the tightly locked Babylon, a dull panic mounts. Under the cover of pitch darkness, the townspeople make pathetic attempts to reinforce the defenses. Crowds of frightened people scurry chaotically near the main gate towers, lugging heavy wicker baskets of wet sand and struggling to roll massive stone boulders. Wealthy aristocrats in soiled clothes breathe heavily alongside exhausted slaves. The fear of imminent death erases all rigid social boundaries. They desperately try to block the gate leaves from the inside, straining their backs and bloodying their palms against the rough stone. A mountain of debris slowly grows in height, as the metal of the gates creaks piteously under the internal pressure. The defenders naively hope to stop the military machine with a simple earthwork. In the morning, Tukulti-Ninurta I gives a new, short order. Specialized forward sapper units move out, trained men who perform their dangerous work with cold calculation. Hiding behind thick wicker mantlets and wooden shields mounted on heavy wheels, the soldiers methodically dig deep trenches in zigzagging lines. Moist earth flies aside in heavy clumps as the sappers relentlessly approach the base of the walls. Their task is clear. They must dig deep, hidden tunnels to physically destroy the ancient foundation of the stronghold. The Babylonian archers, in total desperation, release hundreds of arrows. Wooden shafts fly in a solid cloud, but the sharp bronze tips only sink powerlessly into the wet hides of the mobile covers. The losses of the attacking engineers remain minimal. The Assyrian passive defense system works without a single failure. After long days of the exhausting siege of 1225 BC, the Northerners roll the first battering ram into a direct strike position. Hundreds of muscled soldiers simultaneously haul on thick tow ropes at the officer's sharp command. Massive, solid wheels press into the dry earth with a horrific screech. The tall wooden machine crawls slowly and inevitably toward the main gates. The ancient fired brick prepares to take the direct hit of new engineering thought. The ring of total physical blockade finally closes tightly around the doomed city. Siege towers loom directly over the fragile fortifications, and now Tukulti-Ninurta I gives his engineers the order to move from erecting machines to the methodical destruction of all water arteries. The severing of water arteries is the logical progression of ruthless siegecraft. While the defenders of Babylon watch in horror at the massive cedar battering rams, Tukulti-Ninurta I's sappers are fundamentally reshaping the ancient landscape. Tens of thousands of Assyrian regulars and conscripted laborers receive a curt, decisive command. They take up heavy hoes and wicker baskets, and a massive relocation of millions of cubic meters of dry earth begins. Engineers dig deep diversion canals far beyond the effective range of composite bows. The powerful flow of the Euphrates, which for centuries nourished the sacred capital, is artificially diverted. Work continues around the clock. Thousands of torches burn brightly along the new trenches every night. The Assyrians utilize complex systems of wooden levers to extract the heavy soil. Those who collapse from exhaustion are immediately replaced by fresh strength. The process is relentless. The river's current slows to a sluggish crawl. The water in the wide defensive moats drops precipitously, exposing the slimy bottom of the once deep channels. Dead fish rot in the sun, choking the hot air with the thick stench of putrefaction. Inside the shuttered city, stone wells run dry. Sweet, fresh water turns into filthy brown sludge. By the end of the harsh winter of 1225 BC, thirst begins to break the defenders' pride faster than any siege engine. The illusion of internal order evaporates. Queues for meager drops of moisture escalate into vicious brawls across scorched stone plazas. Bronze knives are drawn for a single gulp of warm water from a cracked jug. Citizens claw their fingers bloody, stubbornly scraping the dry earth at the bottom of empty reservoirs. Logistics have ground to a halt. The temple guard closes ranks tightly around the main cisterns of the Esagila complex. Priests cynically hoard the remaining clean reserves for the ritual cleansing of idols. Common citizens watch as clergymen pour clear water onto the stone steps before the altars. Enteric diseases spread rapidly through the cramped, stagnant residential quarters. The sick drop by the dozens in the narrow streets, and no one clears away their bodies. Rations of fodder grain are slashed by 2/3. The heavy wooden doors of the granaries are secured by the nobility's personal security details. The hope for a positional defense has devolved into a primal struggle for survival. Behind the high brick walls, the psychological warfare machine works without pause. Tukulti-Ninurta I wields primal fear as a precision tool. The capital's outskirts have become a lethally hostile zone. The Assyrians clear-cut the sacred date groves to the root. In the cleared wasteland, carpenters drive hundreds of long wooden stakes deep into the ground. Mass, demonstrative public executions of intercepted refugees begin. There is no uncontrolled rage here, only the cold, routine work of executioners. Assyrian officers pace the rows of the condemned with a steady stride, barking out dry commands. Quartermasters and scribes stand by, methodically recording the tally on wet clay tablets. The horrific spectacle takes place in the total silence of the attacking army. The invaders simply need to clear the perimeter and send a clear visual signal to the besieged. The screams of the dying are monotonous. The sound carries easily over the high walls, searing itself into the consciousness of the exhausted Babylonians. The terror is born from the realization of the absolute, soulless inevitability of the military machine. The crescendo of this theater of terror arrives on a crisp, cold morning. To the dull, rhythmic beat of heavy hide drums, the northerners lead a specific prisoner toward the walls. A nameless Babylonian sentry on the southern gatehouse tower slowly lowers his composite bow. His parched lips move soundlessly. His grip fails, and his weapon hits the brick floor with a dull thud. He cannot believe his eyes. There, below, in the gray road dust, a living god stumbles submissively. Kashtiliash IV, the rightful lord of the universe, is led forth in heavy irons. The ruler, before whom ambassadors of neighboring powers recently knelt, now trudges heavily under the menacing lunges of Assyrian overseers. A heavy copper yoke glints dully against his haggard neck. Assyrian soldiers brutally force him to his knees, facing his own city. They compel him to watch the death throes of his capital. No divine lightning strikes from the clear sky. This blow proves fatal, shattering the defenders' resolve more effectively than any battering ram. The Babylonians see their deified king physically broken and utterly helpless. The psychological foundation of their civilization suffers a critical fissure. The infallibility of power is destroyed before the eyes of a crowd of thousands. Fear covers the streets like a thick shroud. The water shortage and the collapse of faith expose primal survival instincts. While emaciated sentries still stand on the parapets, secret maneuvering has already begun in the dark basements of the luxury palaces. The local elite finally grasp the futility of their position, and the first quiet words of inevitable betrayal echo through the gloomy corridors. Treason takes root within the shadowed hallways of the opulent palaces. Babylon's authority crumbles in the darkness. Lamp oil ran out long ago, and massive bronze incense bowls stand empty. The capital's elite gather secretly in stifling, dim halls. The air is thick with the sour stench of unwashed bodies and stale, primal fear. Men glance around nervously, keeping sweaty palms tight on the carved hilts of concealed daggers. No one trusts their neighbor anymore. Yesterday's political allies look at each other with naked hatred. Arrogant grandees scream themselves hoarse in endless, furious arguments, blaming the high priests of the Esagila for false prophecies and useless sacrifices. The priests close ranks, pointing shaking fingers at the generals and accusing the military of cowardice on the battlefield. A grizzled commander in a soiled silk mantle slams his fist onto a heavy cedar table. The crack of the wood cuts through the brawling. He harshly demands the immediate breaching of the deep temple vaults containing the fodder grain. The high priest turns away with contempt and barks a short command. His personal temple guard instantly draws short copper swords. A brief, brutal skirmish breaks out in the center of the council hall. Metal clangs, and the first heavy drops of blood hit the polished stone floor. The fear of their own allies paralyzes the defense command far more than the enemy arrows flying over the walls. With the arrival of the first days of an unbearably hot spring in 1225 BC, cold political calculus finally triumphs over religious duty. 12 of the wealthiest governors meet secretly in a subterranean wine cellar. They no longer pray to the statues of Marduk. Instead, they meticulously tally the remaining sacks of barley and assess the thickness of the city gates against the rate of the Assyrian ram's progress. These men are used to trading for profit. Now, they are preparing to sell out their sacred capital. Their logic is simple and ruthless. Surrendering the city might save their personal privileges and vast landholdings in the south. Ancient clay archives record the mindset of these men. The conspirators' words were, "Better to bow one's head before a living northern lion than to rot in the same dry pit with dead gods." They make a tactical decision to contact the Assyrian camp immediately. They select 3 of their most loyal servants, stripping them of their traditional Babylonian garments and dressing them in the tattered rags of the lowest slaves. The conspirators give them small, tightly rolled cylinders of soft clay. Detailed schematics of the palace guard rotations and the specific hours for the changing of the guard at the vulnerable northern gates are etched into the clay with fine styluses. It is a mathematically calibrated plan for the treasonous surrender of the great city. After exactly 60 days of a grueling blockade, the covert night operation begins. Under the cover of a moonless night, the 3 messengers slip into a parched drainage conduit. This old sewer leads far beyond the colossal outer fortress walls. Damp stone vaults press tight against the men's shoulders as they crawl on their bellies along the slick, mold-covered floor. They breathe heavily in the foul darkness, the air thick with toxic fumes. Their elbows and knees are scraped to the bone against the rough brickwork. One messenger becomes wedged in a narrow crawl space, sharp stones pinning his ribcage. His comrades coldly abandon him to suffocate and move on in silence. Personal survival has become more important than mutual aid. The remaining 2 emerge outside the line of the blind Babylonian patrols. Now they must cross the dangerous no-man's land undetected and surrender to the enemy pickets. Within the besieged city, paranoia reaches a fever pitch. Early in the morning, the disappearance of the servants is noticed. Guards loyal to the king find the discarded expensive clothing near the open drainage well. Rumors of a massive secret treason spread through the palace like wildfire. Chaotic, violent mass arrests begin. Armed patrols burst into the homes of influential merchants, battering down cedar doors with heavy beams. They drag screaming suspects out onto the sun-drenched streets. Rapid interrogations begin, utilizing extreme physical coercion. Interrogators methodically break fingers, attempting to extract the names of the conspirators. None of the loyalists know the true scale of the betrayal. Not a single commander sleeps at night anymore. They barricade themselves in their bedrooms, shoving heavy oak beds into the darkest corners. They hire brutal street thugs for personal security as the discipline of the regular palace guard collapses. Exhausted soldiers on the high walls look back with growing anxiety, fearing a backstab more than the Assyrian assault ladders. They understand one simple truth. The massive copper leaves of the city gates could open from the inside at any second. None of the rank-and-file warriors want to die for cowardly rulers. The defense of the sacred capital has turned into a dangerous fiction. Meanwhile, the two gaunt messengers reach the Assyrian forward outposts. They fall submissively to their knees before grim northern commanders in polished copper cuirasses, holding out the coveted clay tablets with trembling, filthy hands. The Assyrian officers take the documents with total coldness, offering the traitors no guarantees of safety. They immediately dispatch urgent messages to the field tent of Tukulti-Ninurta I. The northern lord finally holds the keys to the sacred city in his calloused grip. In Babylon, the agonizing wait for an answer drives the elite to the brink of insanity. Nervous tension breaks the psyche faster than hunger. The high priests desperately try to regain control, descending into the darkest basements of the ancient temples with ritual obsidian knives to read the future in animal livers. Obsidian blades gut the final sacrificial sheep with a sickening crunch. In the deep basements of the Assyrian temple, the air is thick with the acrid smoke of cheap incense. The high priests lean low over the animal's entrails, their dry hands trembling with tension. They search for encouraging signs, but the shape of the liver is catastrophically deformed, an omen of total ruin. Ancient texts interpret it with clarity. The gods have turned away. Marduk is silent. The priests exchange looks of primal fear and quickly record the results on wet clay. These cuneiform tablets no longer carry divine will. They document the escalating panic within the temple walls. The religious command structure has suffered its final failure. Above, under the scorching sun of 1225 BC, the city is tearing itself apart. Fodder grain reserves are exhausted. Enormous state granaries stand empty, their massive doors torn off their hinges by the crazed mob. Rats flee the vaults for the sun-scorched streets, where starving citizens snatch them with bare hands. Rations no longer exist, and official decrees carry no weight. Hunger erases the last remnants of a 1,000-year-old civilization. Former craftsmen and merchants fight to the death over a handful of rotten flour on the parched stone plazas. The panic is palpable, tightening like a suffocating noose around the throat of every surviving Babylonian. Nature itself mirrors the internal rot. An unnatural thick fog rises from the dried-out bed of the Euphrates, covering the residential blocks in a viscous gray shroud. Behind it, a massive dust storm arrives from the south. A powerful wind carries tons of fine yellow sand into the faces of the defenders. The sun shines dimly through this dense curtain, like a worn copper coin. Babylonian sentries on the high towers are blinded, choking on the sand. They abandon their heavy ceremonial weapons. In this stifling haze, the most terrifying rumors are born. Whispers of curses and the inevitable, brutal slaughter to come. Common citizens flock to the flat roofs of their mud brick houses, raising emaciated hands to the invisible sky. They scream themselves hoarse in desperate prayer, but the ancient incantations no longer work. Religious hysteria grips entire neighborhoods. Women in tattered linen thrash in convulsions upon the stone pavement. Men tear at their hair and claw their faces until they bleed. Desperate rituals end in mass collapses from exhaustion. The crowd is certain of one terrifying fact. The golden statue of Marduk in the main sanctuary is empty. Their divine protector has abandoned the doomed city. The loss of faith breaks the human spirit much faster than the bronze blades of the invaders break bone. Behind the cracked city walls, a terrifying mechanical order reigns. Assyrian sappers stoically ignore the raging dust storm, pulling leather wraps over their faces as they continue their lethal work. They methodically reinforce the wooden tracks of the heavy rams and grease the axles of the massive wheels with animal fat. Tukulti-Ninurta I sits calm in his field tent, drinking cold water from a silver goblet. He has no belief in mystical omens or the flight of birds. He trusts only in the tension of a bowstring and the cold geometry of his siege works. His army is a pragmatic instrument of total destruction. Inside Babylon, the point of no return arrives, the point of absolute psychological collapse. The remnants of military discipline dissolve in uncontrolled panic. The city plazas are packed with broken people who no longer wait for salvation or negotiations. They wait only for death. This is not just an impending military defeat, it is the total collapse of an ancient worldview. From the inside, the city is already dead. All that remains is to destroy its physical shell. The Assyrian war machine is prepared to deliver the final blow. Outside, a new sound rings out, the deafening, rhythmic creaking of colossal wooden wheels. The massive siege towers are underway, lumbering toward the walls behind which the doomed Babylonians have cast aside all hypocrisy and silently prepare to meet their end. Within the temples of the doomed city, the last vestiges of social pretense vanish. The Babylonians cast aside empty pride. The fine linen tunics of wealthy governors now rub against the lice-ridden rags of street beggars. The once great capital prepares to accept its fate. Tens of thousands of emaciated people sit packed on the cold stone floors of the Esagila complex. They no longer weave political intrigues or argue over land holdings. In the face of northern swords, class divisions lose all meaning. The vast halls are filled with stagnant air, and the faces of the condemned are illuminated only by the guttering light of sparse oil torches. Cruel fatalism has paralyzed the human will. No one sharpens a dagger or checks the strength of a parched leather shield. The defenders sit in silence, submissively accepting their role as sacrifices on this giant architectural altar of a lost war. Their shoulders are slumped, their lips pressed tight. There are no tears, only the dull, monotonous breathing of a doomed crowd. Beyond the battered, fissured brick walls, a starkly different reality unfolds. There is no room there for fatalism or despair, only the cold, mechanical order of a massive military camp. The troops do not sleep. 100,000 disciplined soldiers stand in mathematically precise ranks. They do not speak or offer up fervent prayers. In the pre-dawn gloom, freshly sharpened bronze glints with a ruthless light. Thousands of heavy spears form a sea of metal ready to flood the city. Veteran officers with weathered faces pace the ranks with a measured, rhythmic stride, methodically checking every leather strap and bowstring. This colossal army functions as one giant, soulless organism, stripped of emotion, compassion, or fatigue. It has only the clear technical objective set by the king, the total sweep of the city. The sound of thousands of whetstones sliding along blades merges into a single monotonous hum that drowns out the night wind. In the center of this geometrically perfect order stands the field tent of the Assyrian monarch. Inside, pitch torches burn brightly. Tukulti-Ninurta I stands motionless before a massive wooden table where detailed clay diagrams of Babylon's quarters are laid out. The spies have done their work flawlessly. The king eschews grandiloquent speeches on martial valor. Instead, he cold-bloodedly hands out specific tactical orders. His words sound like the dry, bureaucratic protocol of an impending massacre. With a bronze stylus, he marks the attack vectors for every infantry century and regulates the rigid order of the future pillaging. There must be no chaotic looting. All seized temple riches must be strictly accounted for by quartermasters. Every severed head of a defiant defender is to be meticulously logged by military scribes. This is the highest form of cynical military pragmatism. The destruction of the oldest civilization of the ancient East is planned as a routine logistical operation. The movement of valuable cargo and the removal of physical obstructions. The final and longest night of 1225 BC descends upon the old world order. The air over the plain is becoming unbearably thick, almost tactile. In the stifling darkness, sounds take on a frightening, unnatural clarity. An unnamed Assyrian shock trooper in the vanguard, positioned directly against the walls, tightly grips the rough wooden hilt of his short sword. The wood is cool against his palm. His muscles are strained to the limit beneath heavy layers of thick oxhide armor. He hears only the steady, synchronized breathing of dozens of his brothers in arms, standing shoulder to shoulder in a tight formation. He feels no personal hatred toward the invisible Babylonians. He feels only a primal, muscular anticipation for the imminent, inevitable surge forward upon command. To this grunt, the massive sleeping city ahead is just another physical barrier in his king's path. Just another high wall of sun-baked clay. And that clay wall must be broken, absolutely and ruthlessly, by direct order. The pre-dawn silence is suddenly and violently shattered by the deafening shriek of tensioned ropes. Giant siege engines groan into lethal motion. Hundreds of muscled arms simultaneously release heavy wooden catches at the sharp snap of an officer's baton. A colossal cedar beam, capped with a head of solid cast bronze, hurtles forward with frantic speed. The first blow, monstrous in its physical force, slams into the brickwork of the central gate fortifications, already weakened by sappers. The ground beneath their feet perceptibly shudders. Dry, ancient clay cracks with a loud, snapping report. A cloud of age-old dust, incredibly thick and impenetrable, instantly billows into the grey morning sky. The first massive strike is immediately and inevitably followed by a second. Impact. A dull pause. Another impact. The cadence of impending death is finally set. The thick metal hinges of the gates screech piteously, deforming irreversibly under the colossal weight of the siege engine. The ancient, sacred stone simply cannot withstand the focused kinetic pressure of a new age. A deafening crash marks the first gaping breach through the solid, seemingly eternal monolith of the great city wall. The defensive line is finally broken. The lead assault detachments of Assyrian heavy infantry silently adjust their grip on their spears and rush headlong into that narrow gap, choked with thick brick dust. The dense brick dust instantly clogs the lungs of the attacking soldiers. Breathing becomes excruciatingly painful. The air is hot and dry. But the lead elements of the Assyrian infantry do not break their stride. They pour into the narrow breach as a single dark mass. Their heavy boots slide loudly over the rubble of ancient brickwork. Ahead, they face the desperate resistance of the remnants of the Babylonian palace guard. The defenders hastily form a final, flimsy line of defense right behind the shattered gates. They white-knuckle their antiquated copper spears. Their hands tremble betrayingly from extreme nervous exhaustion. There is no romance of gallant combat here. There is only sticky sweat, caustic construction dust, and primal, animal fear. The first hard contact between the two armies occurs in the narrow city streets. This is not a series of graceful, noble duels. This is the ruthless physical pressure of mass against mass. The Northerners utilize advanced close-order tactics. They take cover behind tall wooden shields. They execute synchronized short thrusts with their spears. Strike. A dull groan. A step forward. Strike again. Babylonian guards fall by the dozens onto the scorched stones. Sharp bronze tips easily find the gaps in their ceremonial leather armor. The air fills with the piercing wail of thousands of terrified people. The Assyrians methodically suppress every pocket of organized resistance. They work with a cold, purely mechanical indifference. To them, this is just bloody, grueling physical labor. Suddenly, another deafening crack rings out. The monumental wall, weakened by prolonged sapping, fails to withstand the constant vibration. A massive section of ancient masonry collapses with a horrific roar directly onto the defenders' positions. Heavy fired bricks instantly bury dozens of Babylonian warriors. A thick cloud of gray dust once again completely obscures the morning sun. This fatal structural failure finally breaks the defensive front. The surviving defenders dissolve into animal panic. They drop their heavy ceremonial weapons en masse. They turn and flee blindly into the depths of the winding residential quarters. At that very moment, an irreversible strategic shift occurs. On the southern flank, the heavy copper leaves of the secondary gates are suddenly opened from within. Whether they were surrendered by traitors among the frightened local nobility, or if it was the result of total administrative chaos, the ancient historical chronicles remain coldly silent. But the result of this action is absolutely catastrophic. A second, even more powerful wave of fresh Assyrian infantry pours unopposed into the wide opening. The fate of the greatest city of the ancient world is decided by a single unlocked door. The war machine of Tukulti-Ninurta I finally breaks out into the open expanse of the cramped city streets. By the sweltering noon of 1225 BC, the streets of Babylon have turned into slick, lethal traps. Assyrian commanders maintain iron-fisted control over the pace of their units' advance. They bark short, clipped commands. They strictly forbid their soldiers from breaking formation for petty looting. The main tactical objective of the offensive has not yet been achieved. They must completely paralyze the great metropolis's will to resist. The heavy infantry methodically clears one wealthy district after another. The Northerners deliver precise, fatal blows to anyone attempting to block their path. No one is counting the bodies of dead citizens now. Military scribes simply make deep notches on wet clay tablets as each successive key intersection is seized. This is the highest degree of bureaucratic cynicism in the conditions of brutal, total urban warfare. An unnamed Babylonian militiaman backs away in total terror down a narrow paved street. He swings a short bronze dagger blindly in front of him. His bare feet slip on the smooth stones. Those stones are now liberally coated in a sticky crimson slick. He breathes heavily and rapidly. His eyes are unnaturally wide with the unbearable horror of approaching death. Advancing toward him at a steady pace is a solid wall of dark enemy shields. From behind this wall, no human faces are visible. Only dull metal helmets and the sharp tips of long spears can be seen. One precise, ruthless thrust from a northern soldier instantly snuffs out the life of this simple militiaman. His heavy body is roughly kicked aside. The advancing line doesn't even slow its steady, mathematically calculated, lethal stride. The sacred city rapidly plunges into absolute, uncontrollable chaos. Animal panic relentlessly drives massive crowds of civilians away from the breached outer walls. People trample each other to death by the dozens in narrow, dead-end alleys. They desperately try to escape. They ditch their meager belongings on the ground. They lose their own children in the crush. The terror of the inevitably approaching iron tread of the Assyrian legions robs them of their last shreds of reason. They flee in the only available direction. All the wide roads of the besieged capital lead to the giant temple complex in the center. With every passing hour of 1225 BC, the iron ring around the central sanctuaries tightens. The vanguard of the attacking northern army steps indifferently over hundreds of bodies abandoned on the pavement. They emerge onto the wide processional road, smoothly paved with white limestone. The dull thud of their heavy soldier boots echoes repeatedly off the walls of luxurious mansions. Ahead, the colossal, seemingly impregnable ziggurats tower mightily. That is where the capital's elite, crazed with primal fear, have barricaded themselves. That is where the incredible, legendary riches of the ancient world are stored. The soldiers tighten their grip on the damp hilts of their blood-stained swords. Strict military discipline begins to slowly give way to a cold, maniacal lust for total plunder. With a primal, low roar, the Assyrians burst into the Esagila complex. The cavernous roar of the attacking soldiers echoes repeatedly off the high stone vaults of the Esagila. A massive crowd of armed men slams into the heavy cedar doors of the main sanctuary at a run. The ancient wood, adorned with thick plates of hammered copper, cracks loudly under the blows of heavy iron crowbars. Assyrian sappers work with incredible speed and coordination. They feel absolutely no reverence for this place. To them, it is just another warehouse of valuable resources. The last temple guards attempt to form a thin defensive line on the wide marble steps. Their faces are distorted with extreme despair. The northern shock troops simply sweep them away with one powerful, coordinated surge of their tight formation. Short thrusts of bronze swords methodically clear the way up. The polished white steps instantly turn into slippery, lethal traps. The defenders vanish without a trace in this merciless military meat grinder. The space of the Great Temple in the spring of 1225 BC plunges into the utter hell of systematic looting. This is not a wild bacchanalia, but a strictly organized logistical process. Thousands of unarmed civilians huddle desperately in the dark corners of the spacious halls. They cover their heads with filthy hands in terror. They blindly hope for divine intervention at the ancient altars, but the northern king's soldiers roughly smash through the thin internal wooden partitions of the shrines. A routine, absolutely emotionless seizure of valuable slaves begins right at the feet of the divine statues. Warriors busily bind the hands of weeping women and exhausted men with stout ropes. They quickly form long human columns for immediate transport to transit camps. No one indulges in senseless violence for the sake of violence. This is the cold pragmatism of northern officers. Commanders dryly assess the physical condition of each prisoner on the spot. The sick and the elderly are eliminated with short, precise stabs to the back, so they do not slow the future movement of the columns through the desert. The horror of this historical moment is born precisely from the icy, bureaucratic mundanity of the proceedings. In adjacent rooms, armed squads burst into the ancient temple archives. An elderly Babylonian scribe falls to his knees before the high oak shelves. He desperately tries to shield thousands of thin, cuneiform texts with his frail body. An Assyrian soldier silently strikes him in the face with the thick butt of a spear. The infantrymen mindlessly topple the heavy shelves. Centuries of knowledge, precise astronomical observations, and sacred hymns fall to the hard stone floor with a sharp crunch. The heavy, iron-shod boots of the victors indifferently grind the baked clay into dust. Centuries of unquestioned cultural superiority of the sacred city turn into filthy construction debris in just a few hours of efficient work by the enemy infantry. Soldiers methodically strip thin sheets of gold leaf from the sanctuary walls with their short knives. They twist the precious metal into crude lumps. They toss them into bottomless leather army sacks. Military quartermasters pedantically pick the sturdy locks of the main temple treasuries. They set up their precision bronze scales right on the blood-slicked floor. Soldiers continuously carry out massive gold chalices, vessels encrusted with rare stones, and heavy silver ingots. Scribes quickly scratch the weight of every seized item onto their tablets. Enormous riches, which generations of powerful priests had carefully accumulated over long millennia, are now dryly accounted for as standard inventory assets. The invaders' loot is paid for generously by rivers of blood flowing through the temple's drainage channels, but not a single Assyrian pays it any mind. The culmination of historical humiliation occurs in the very heart of the complex. Elite units of the king's personal guard, carrying burning torches, confidently enter the inner sanctum. There, in the thick gloom, the colossal statue of the supreme god Marduk, cast in pure gold, glimmers dully. For centuries, the local elite had convinced the world that a single foreign glance at this idol brought certain doom. But the massive stone ceiling does not collapse onto the heads of the invaders. The soldiers cold-bloodedly throw thick hemp ropes directly around the deity's shining neck. They heave on the lines with all their might. The statue hits the ancient granite pedestal with a deafening, heavy, metallic crash. The sound of falling dead metal finally and irrevocably records the collapse of the city's sacred status. The guards roughly haul the deity across the smooth marble slabs. They drag it out of the cool shadows of the temple and into the sweltering, sun-drenched street. Thousands of shackled Babylonian prisoners raise their eyes and see an absolutely unthinkable, shocking sight. Their almighty protector lies helplessly in a creaking wooden army wagon. His face is thickly coated in gray dust. The Babylonians prayed to the great Marduk for protection, but his golden statue left the city in the Assyrian baggage train, proving that Tukulti-Ninurta's steel was stronger than the prayers of the most ancient priests. All hope in this city is finally dead. Thick, black pillars of smoke rise slowly over the plundered altars of Babylon, and through the wide streets, heavily littered with dead bodies, already rolls the heavy war chariot of the man who cold-bloodedly planned this apocalypse. The heavy war chariot of the Assyrian king rolls slowly down the wide processional road. The massive wooden wheels crush fragments of ancient fired brick with a dull crunch. They ruthlessly grind abandoned ceremonial weapons and the bodies of slain citizens. Thick, dark blood heavily stains the carved spokes. Tukulti-Ninurta I enters the desecrated heart of the defeated metropolis. There is no smug smile on his weathered face. His gaze remains absolutely cold and calculating. He looks at the smoking ruins of the greatest temples as if they were a perfectly ordinary, successfully completed military objective. A thick, acrid suspension of gray ash hangs in the air. The sharp smell of burning mixes heavily with the thick aroma of spilled temple oils. The victor halts his lathered horses right in the central stone plaza before the ruined Esagila complex. He briefly raises his right hand in a heavy bronze gauntlet. At that very moment, the organized, methodical looting of the sacred capital instantly ceases. The soldiers stop, not out of a sudden fit of mercy. They have simply taken everything. Behind the high, scarred walls, there is nothing left that holds even the slightest physical value. The king issues a new, extremely specific order to his engineers. Babylon must not merely be defeated. The great city must be stripped of the very physical possibility of future resistance. Northern sappers immediately pick up heavy iron sledgehammers. They approach the inner base of the colossal fortifications in a coordinated manner. The long, monotonous process of the total destruction of ancient architecture begins. The thud of metal against hard clay echoes through the deserted, blood-soaked streets. Millions of bricks collapse into the wide, dry moats with a horrific roar. Tens of thousands of enslaved citizens are forced to use their own worn hands to dismantle the towers they once considered absolutely impregnable. The sacral, physical boundary between the sacred city and the outside world is methodically erased. Brick by brick, the enormous gaping breaches widen to the very horizon. The great fortifications that once inspired awe in foreign ambassadors are turned into flat, dusty mounds of gray construction debris. This is the brutal, extremely pragmatic finale of an entire era. While the engineers tear down the walls, military quartermasters form endless lines of new slaves. The victors are interested in more than just other people's temple silver. Assyrian pragmatism extends far beyond banal material gain. Officers sort the surviving prisoners on the scorched plazas with cold calculation. Strong craftsmen are immediately shackled in heavy chains, but a special reinforced guard is assigned to a completely different category of people. Soldiers roughly herd Babylonian scholars into tight rows. They lead the old astronomers out into the scorching sun. They tightly bind the hands of the best temple scribes. The Assyrians methodically load tens of thousands of heavy clay tablets into creaking wagons. The cuneiform archives are carefully packed into durable leather bags. This is a colossal, unprecedented intellectual seizure in ancient history. The Babylonian sages march submissively north under the monotonous cracks of the overseers' whips. Their bare feet leave bloody prints on the hot sand of the long trade routes. They will bring their ancient, centuries-refined knowledge to the northern capital of Ashur.
They will become the disenfranchised intellectual resource of a new, vast empire. Their knowledge will cynically lay the solid foundation for the future great libraries of Nineveh. The cultural heritage of the defeated becomes free building material for the ambitions of the conquerors. The news of the physical fall of the sacred capital spreads rapidly across the entire Near East. Exhausted messengers bring these grim tidings to the distant palaces of neighboring independent powers. The rulers of mighty Egypt listen tensely to the sparse reports of their intelligence. The lords of the Hittite kingdom nervously grip the armrests of their stone thrones. The ancient world experiences a deep, paralyzing shock. They understand one immutable truth. The unquestioned diplomatic authority of the old elites has been destroyed to its very foundation. Old papyri and treaties with heavy seals are no longer worth even the soft clay they were pressed into. No high walls guarantee survival anymore. A completely new, brutal historical reality begins. Assyrian military hegemony hangs forever over the entire region like a thick, impenetrable shadow. The new tactics of total war prove their unconditional, crushing effectiveness. The loss of centuries-old sacred status is fully and forever paid for by an ignominious military defeat. This is the dry, cold conclusion. The historical process is absolutely indifferent to the tears of the losers. The tragedy of one people always becomes a solid step for the rise of another. The march of time does not notice the death screams in the burning archives. The circle of history closes. No ancient, grand titles save a massive state if it has long since rotted from within due to corruption and blindness. The pride of bloated elites, detached from brutal reality, is inevitably paid for with the lives of their own citizens. The illusion of eternal security crumbled into grey dust under the rhythmic blows of heavy engineering machines. Babylon believed in its own exceptionalism, forgetting to sharpen its bronze swords in time. History does not forgive weakness, and a civilization that relies on past merits instead of a strong army will inevitably collapse under the pressure of its own mistakes. Tell me, looking at the ruins of their illusions, was it worth believing in divine protection and trying to buy safety with titles when the most ruthless army of the ancient world arrived at your gates?